You're listening to Liberty Buzzard with Dustin Hammett and Thomas Umstattd Jr.
Episode 43.
I'm Dustin Hammett.
I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr.
Welcome to Liberty Buzzard, the podcast for inquisitive minds. Today, we are going to discuss the resurgence of private employee unions, or not, depending on your perspective. My perspective is that we are going to see a resurgence of private employee unions, not necessarily because I'm a fan of it. I just think the economic conditions are going to bear it out. The reason I started thinking about this, I saw an article in, I can't remember what the original article was, but the article we're going to link to in the show notes is from TechCrunch, and it's about a group of workers at Whole Foods Market leading an effort to establish a union for the Amazon-owned company. So that's the big deal here. We have Amazon and Jeff Bezos, the king of the world, and they own Whole Foods, which, as most of you probably know, Whole Foods used to be an independent company. It was pretty popular, at least at first, for treating its employees very well. And then Amazon bought it, and they are the evil empire, depending, once again, on your perspective. And so now all of these employees are seeking to unionize. They wrote a big letter. There is a cross-regional committee, and they wrote that they are, quote, concerned about the direction of Whole Foods in an Amazon era. So, not necessarily just because one company is bought out and they're concerned about their continued treatment, they being employees. I think that we're going to see a resurgence of private employee unions because of the wage stagnation. If that continues, I'm going to make an if-then statement. If that continues, then I believe we will see a resurgence in private employee unions. That was the antidote back in the Iron Age, late 1800s, early 1900s, was the unionization, which did a pretty effective job at raising wages for what's the best way to say this? For your regular average worker. Of course, back then it was your steel workers, your iron workers, your tradesmen. So if this wage stagnation continues, Thomas, I think we're going to see a resurgence. Thomas, I believe you disagree. What do you think?
Yeah, so a couple of points. One, the heyday of unions back 100 years ago, while they did accomplish wage increases, that wasn't their primary motivating force, and that wasn't their primary mission. It's really hard to fight against scabs, which are people who break unions. There's unions on strike because they want higher pay, and other people who are willing to work for that pay are walking past them. That alone is not very powerful. What they were really negotiating for was better working conditions. When you're working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and every week someone is dying in your factory, you are really motivated to form a union. You're really motivated to strike, and it's harder to get scabs or union breakers to cross the line to walk into a factory where they are then going to work for 12 hours a day and somebody is going to die every week. And so I feel like once you take that safety element out, it's a lot harder to motivate a union. And I feel like the threat of a union is enough to get the wage to go up. Because as you know, Amazon just this week announced that they are raising the minimum wage for all Amazon employees, including Whole Foods employees, to $15 an hour. So if you thought Whole Foods was expensive before, Whole Foods is about to get more expensive. And I think this is the fundamental problem with minimum wage, is that it makes people uncompetitive, it makes regions uncompetitive, it makes countries uncompetitive because of this global trade. The more expensive you make your workers, the more work is going to leave. And when we raise the minimum wage nationally, what happens? Recession. So we raised the minimum wage in 2007, and what happened? We had an epic recession. That was really bad. And I believe that those are connected. I know that no one makes that noise because it's not politically popular to connect the minimum wage increase with recession, but it incentivizes businesses to replace human workers either with cheaper humans somewhere else or with robots. So in states that raise the minimum wage for, restaurants, you see lots of automation where suddenly you're getting your own soda and you're, punching buttons and placing the order yourself, right? So instead, what they effectively are forced to do is they end up firing that person who would have taken your order, who would have had a job at $10 an hour. They're not worth $15 an hour. It's not worth paying them $15 an hour when you can replace them with a kiosk that does that same work for less. And the more expensive you make humans, the more attractive you make robots. And I think this is a really scary thing because low-wage jobs are the most vulnerable jobs to be replaced by robots, by automation of one kind or another. The more complicated a job is, the more difficult a job is, the more judgment a job requires, things that tend to be correlated with the expensiveness of finding a human to do that job, the harder it is to replace a robot. If a human has to go to 4 years of college to do a job or 8 years of college to do a job, it's a lot harder to train a robot to do that job than if you can train a human to do it in a week. You can probably train an AI to do it after 6 months, especially with machine learning and neural nets and all of that. So I feel like people will try to unionize, but I think that the state of the world now with global trade just makes it so hard because the union busters are now not having to walk past the picket line. They're walking from the unemployment line in Bangladesh into a job that they're very happy to take for worse working conditions and for lower money. Or the robots, they have no morals. They're programmed to bust the unions. And I just don't see the power working like it did 100 years ago.
I don't necessarily disagree with you that it's going to be just like 100 years ago. However, just like the famous Mark Twain quote, I believe it was Mark Twain, said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So, yeah, it's not going to be necessarily like the Teamsters that we saw back in the early part of the 20th century. But I think that there will be a resurgence somewhat of a collectivization front. And that based on that if-then statement that I put out there, so I perfectly concede that if wages rise commensurate with commensurate with how the economy is doing, I think that it probably will be a moot point. What do you think, Thomas? Because I thought a lot about this. What do you think, Thomas, is the cause of the wage stagnation that we currently see in the economy?
Well, part of the wage stagnation is coming from the fact that we haven't had any big productivity boosts. So the last 60 years, basically ever since World War II, each decade has seen huge increases to productivity. Technologies that have really changed how productive people are, whether it was putting a phone on their desk that was capable of calling any other phone number in the world, to being able to hop on a plane and within a day be anywhere in the world, to being able to send a fax anywhere in the world, to having spreadsheets, like the invention of Microsoft Excel and other spreadsheet applications in the late 80s, early 90s as they started to take off, had a huge impact on productivity. And being able to fly around the world is a huge impact on productivity. And if you think about the technologies that we've had in the last 10 years, we've had social media and we've had mobile phones. So if you're an office worker, does having a mobile phone make you more productive or less productive? I would argue for many office workers, it actually makes them less productive. They are swinging Angry Birds around and hiding in the bathroom on Twitter. And it's actually reducing their productivity. And at best, it's having a neutral impact. So you're able to take work with you. But the other downside of that mobile phone is that you take work home with you, which studies show when you don't rest, you're not as productive. And so it's actually reducing your overall productivity. There's this expectation that you're always available and you can never go on vacation, and that hurts your productivity. And social media being this big distraction hurts your productivity in the sense of you're spending time on social media, but not just that. Social media makes you sad and depressed, which makes you less productive. And so technology, which in general has been this marching force of, productivity. And somebody carving widgets was able to make one widget a day, but on Henry Ford's assembly line, they can make 100 widgets a day. So we can pay them 10 times more and we still make 10 times more money. Everybody wins, right? Like that trend seems to be stopping. And technology is not making people more productive like it used to. It's making some people more productive here and there. But in general, the way that it's making people productive is by replacing those people altogether, where suddenly this job is done by no one at all, right? You go to the self-checkout line and you check yourself out of the grocery store instead of having the cashier check you out. The cashier has been replaced with a checkout robot. You don't think of it as a robot because it doesn't have a face, but it's this same effective result. So I think that that's a big part of the wage stagnation, is that people aren't gaining in productivity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll have to dwell on that. I mean, I guess the question is, has technology made humans more productive? And let me see, I'm going to repeat your point back to you just to make sure I'm digesting it correctly. So what you're saying is that the technology that we've experienced, because you mentioned Excel and basically the not resurgence, but the insurgence, I guess you could say, of the personal computer into the workplace, where we each have our own productivity machines, our each own personal computers, where we have Excel and all these great applications. Since then, what you're saying is that humans have not become that much more productive, per se. I mean, I guess I could buy that. But I just don't see... I guess from a social perspective, when we discussed this before, I'm trying to figure out how are we going to assign these scarce resources, the basis of economics, how are we going to assign these scarce resources across society when our wages are stagnant, and we're going to have people that are essentially angry that they're not getting their piece of the pie. And that, I think that just kind of reinforces my point that they're eventually going to say, we're getting replaced by computers. This is bullcrap, and we're going to make a stand. Whether that is going to have the force of law, says all of a sudden it becomes more of a pack, less of a union, and now we have some type of situation where the state of California is dictating that you have to have at least 5 humans if you're a company that has more than $1 million a year. So that's what I'm talking about, is a resurgence of private employee unions. Maybe it doesn't happen in the way that we think it's going to happen, but maybe it happens in a way that we haven't anticipated yet. But I still think that the collectivization of people is going to happen, and I think it's based on history. I think it's one of those things that is going to happen when you have people that are dissatisfied with how much money they're earning.
So I have a McKinsey company report here in front of me because I knew there was some numbers on this, and it's got productivity growth numbers. And productivity growth, if I'm interpreting this chart correctly, bounces between 15% and 25%. No, that's accelerating sectors. It bounces between 15 accelerating sectors and 25 accelerating sectors. And then in 2010, across all of these different metrics, it basically falls off a cliff. It was like, what happens in 2010? The App Store happens in 2010. iPhones suddenly are in all of the hands in 2010. And since then, productivity growth has just been really low. And I think that this is kind of the dark side of mobile devices. We don't realize how much time we're spending on these mobile devices as a society and as individuals. And the companies are starting to acknowledge this, right? The latest version of OS 10 for the iPhone will give you a report on how much time you're spending on your phone. And I bet you, dear listener, that if you were to look at this report on your phone right now, you would be shocked at how much time you're spending on your phone. You're like, there's no way I'm spending 2 hours on my phone every day. There's no possible way. And yet those 2 hours are being pulled away from all of your other productivity or more productive uses of your time. And that is ultimately not just affecting you, it's doing it to everyone, because even homeless people now have smartphones in some parts of the country, and everyone else in between. You and a homeless person have a smartphone, and if it's pulling an hour out of every American's pocket, making them that much less productive, that is a huge impact on the economy. And sure, people may say, well, my wages were stagnant 100 years ago, or my great-grandfather's wages were stagnant. What did he do to fix it? He formed a labor union, and that was the solution. And I don't disagree that we may try labor unions again as a solution, but they're not the solution for this problem. If the problem is indeed the smartphone, a labor union is not going to solve the smartphone, because what are people going to be doing on their picket lines? They're going to be on their smartphones. They're going to be taking photos of each other and live streaming it. There's no getting away from it that way. And this impact of social media, it's a lot like the saloons were in the West in the 1800s. The evil of the saloons and why there were so many women trying to ban alcohol altogether wasn't because of the effect of the alcohol itself. It was the effect of the saloon culture on the greater culture, and the fact that the gathering place, the place for social interaction, shifted from the churches to the saloons. And that was a shift that women predominantly, but some men, but it was the Women's Temperance League that was leading this, really found to be scary. And they banned, and it's so scary that they were able to get the country to ban alcohol altogether and close all of the saloons. And the saloons are not back to this day. Bars do not have the cultural touchstone that they used to. When you come into a town, you don't visit the saloon first off to get the news, right? The society has shifted forward, and we don't know what the solutions are yet to the social media impact, but it's more than just a fun diversion. I think that it's this dark thing that's affecting our politics, it's affecting our business, it's affecting our religion in good ways, but also in bad ways. And we need to acknowledge those bad ways, because it is affecting how much money you make. If you were to get rid of all social media, I bet you your wages would increase. That this impact would not be affecting you if you only made phone calls on your smartphone. Am I doing that? No. So it's not like I'm leading the charge on this.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, though, because social media, I mean, for business, has been an incredible revolution in the way that we reach out and we interact, and we interact with each other. So, to say that social media is all bad, I mean, your point's taken, Thomas. Yeah, there's a lot of bad aspect of social media. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure, I haven't checked it out yet, but I'm pretty sure the newest update to the iPhone has an app or has an inherent capability where you can track how much time you're spending on what app, and you can actually limit yourself. So you have a self-limitation there on the iPhone to help you with this new drug that is, your handheld device or your device or what have you. So yeah, your point's taken there. But yeah, it's the yin and yang. There's good with the bad, and the way that we interact with each other has been revolutionized and forever changed. And as a marketer yourself, I think you have to recognize how incredibly useful social media has become for the small business person. Whereas before, it was a lot more difficult for an individual to have their own commercial and be able to put it out there for everybody to see. Now, heck, for my business, I made 2 yesterday myself. Where I narrated them and I created them myself, and I'm going to throw them on Twitter. I'm going to throw them on Facebook when I'm ready. And I'm pretty sure it's going to get me some business. So, it's bad, but in terms of, productivity as a small business person, as a new small business person, I got to tell you, it's the technology for me has been phenomenal. The technology has allowed me it's been a leverage of what I can do. Whereas before, I had to hire a bookkeeper, I had to do this, I had to do that, I had to do the other. Now it's all outsourced, for my new logo. I went on Fiverr and I paid some guy in India $40 to create me a new logo. It looks great. It happened in 2 days. You couldn't do that 20, 30 years ago unless you knew a cartoonist, which I don't.
But again, let's say the logo designers don't like the fact that you're only paying $40 for a logo, and they form a union. That doesn't keep you from going on Fiverr and hiring some guy in India. And not only is it only $40, here's the other thing: you don't have to pay Social Security taxes for his time. You don't have to pay Medicare taxes for his time. You don't have to pay your share of the income taxes for his time. So even if the American logo designer was the same $40, if you hired that person as an employee, they would be 25% more expensive for you, 15% more expensive for you than the Indian guy, because of all the different taxes. And it's not just the taxes, but you also have to account for all of that. So you have to file, 4 or 5 different pieces of reporting to the government of like, I hired this person, here's how much they paid them. You have to do your withholdings and your quarterly reports, none of which you have to do with the guy in India. So not only is he cheaper because of the strength of the dollar and like trade moving abroad, but also like our tax system really discourages you from hiring Americans right now. And I just don't see American workers having the power to form a union. And you're right. Technology is not universally making us less productive. I mean, the existence of this podcast couldn't have existed 10 years ago. We'd have had to meet in person, which would have cost us 2 hours of driving, 4 hours of driving collectively, potentially. And that would have made this podcast, unfeasible in just 10 years ago. And now we can record it remotely. So I'm not saying that technology is universally bad. And I'm not saying that productivity growth has stalled completely. But I'm saying is that for the first time, we have a technology that is negatively impacting our productivity, that is offsetting some of these other things that are positive to productivity.
So I guess the way I'll put it, as you're talking and as I'm sitting here, I'm trying to digest this thought that I have. And it's just a thought. I'm just kind of toying with the idea of the future. I'm not saying I'm support it one way or the other. I just, it's fun to try to predict the future. Is my prediction, even if it's right, am I a sage? Nah, it's just kind of a fun thing to do. So here's what I was thinking, Thomas. And you're right. The independent contractor movement, I think, is kind of it's really going to revolutionize. Technology is going to revolutionize the independent contractor movement to where one day we are all independent contractors, because you made the excellent point. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, workmen's compensation, all of those different types of federally mandated social programs and social insurance programs are extremely expensive. They're extremely expensive. And if a company can in any way farm out work so that they don't have to pay that stuff, yeah, they're going to do that. Case in point, for me, when I get to the point of revenue where I need to hire an assistant, am I going to hire an assistant under my LLC? Heck no. I'm going to hire a virtual assistant, and somebody else is going to pay for that person's employment taxes. So yeah, the independent contractor movement, I think it's the wave of the future. And when I started thinking about that, I'm thinking, holy smokes, maybe it's not an employee union like the Teamsters, but maybe we have a resurgence of trade guilds. And my analogy here for the present day is going to be much like realtors. They don't have a trade guild per se, but they have a very, very powerful political movement through the National Association of Realtors, and then each state has its own association of realtors. For example, here in Texas, we have the Texas Association of Realtors, and that is an organization who isn't a guild or a union per se. But I will tell you right now that the amount of money that they collect from each of their members is very powerful, and anytime something goes that has to do with real estate and how real estate is going to be practiced in the state of Texas or nationally, they are putting immense monetary and political pressure on politicians to make sure that it goes their way. So yeah, maybe we don't have unions the way that we've traditionally thought, but maybe we have some type of resurgence of trade guilds.
I mean, that's a really good point. And I do think that realtors, or realtors, as they're supposed to be pronounced, very much act like an old kind of medieval trade guild. And they are very powerful politically, often to the expense of homeowners, because they are able to get themselves granted government monopolies and make it illegal to compete with them. And the same sorts of things that trade guilds used to do back in the day, right? Like if you weren't a member of the, Masons Guild, you couldn't do masonry in medieval Paris, right? You had to be a guild member. You had to go through the initiation and become an apprentice and a journeyman and, go through all of those steps. And in many ways, realtors act in that same way. And that maybe that is the future, where more people do that and look to the government for protection. The challenge, though, is that for a lot of work, one government can't provide suitable protection. Right. So like a realtor has an advantage in that they have to be physically present to be your chaperone in the house. But, in a future world where that could be done by drone, right? Somebody in India could be a realtor and do all of the research online and send a drone to walk you through the house. I mean, this is kind of an extreme example, but that's the sort of thing that is the trend, is you're being replaced by, or you're competing with rather, robots, and you're competing with people in other countries who are willing to work for less. And I don't know if a clan of merchants alone is enough unless it's an international guild, right? The International Guild of Graphics Designers. You become a journeyman graphic designer and then a master graphics designer. I don't know. We've tried that in the web design world, I'll say, and it has failed every time because there's just not enough advantage, and we're too freedom-minded and too competition-minded to put up with that.
Well, I mean, it's true until it's not true anymore, right? I mean, realtors in the historically were very, very independent, and there was no licensure in the early 20th century that needed to practice real estate. And one of the reasons that it became required was because there's a lot of hucksters, and there's a lot of swindling going on. So it required licensure, much like medical doctors eventually required licensure. And even barbers these days and beauticians require licensure. So, as I'm going through this process, it's when you're a small business person, you're starting out, it's very frustrating because it's almost like you require licensure to do everything. A licensure to be an electrician, a plumber, this, that, and the other. And Texas is a lot better than a lot of states out there. I mean, there's a lot of states out there where you have to have a license just to walk from your house to your car. It's incredible. So to go back to your point as far as drones showing people around, that I think that's where you have a guild like the National Association of Realtors, or each of the states Association of Realtors, who would be probably applying quite a lot of political pressure to make it against the law to use a drone, and they're going to come up with some good reason, like drones cause a fire hazard or something like that, and therefore should not be allowed. So yeah.
I'm sorry, you can't hear me rolling my eyes on the microphone. But the excuse, you're exactly right. They'll try to find some excuse. And it's what Blockbuster should have done. They should have found some regulation to make mailing DVDs through the mail illegal so that they wouldn't have to compete with, embrace the future. And I feel like that's just, if your strategy is trying to legally mandate that we do something in an old-fashioned, inefficient way, I feel like that is not a winning strategy in the long run. And it's certainly not a winning strategy for society, because you're asking society to give you money you're now no longer deserving because you're so inefficient.
Well, we're talking about, efficiencies and idealisms in the perfect world. I'm talking about people protecting themselves. And what's good in the long run and what's good for me right now are a lot of times diametrically opposed. The United Autos Union, it was really good for them, United Auto Workers, UAW, whatever it was. It was really good for them to start off with because it raised their wages. It gave them some, gold-plated health insurance, and it was a really, really good deal for them until it essentially caused the United States auto industry to be so uncompetitive that they became bankrupt. So, yeah, I mean, were the United Auto Workers concerned with them shooting themselves in the foot by making their own companies essentially unproductive, or not unproductive, but uncompetitive? No, they didn't care. They wanted theirs. They wanted theirs now, and that's kind of human nature, especially as a collective. So. Yeah, you're right, Thomas. Is it efficient? Is it the best thing in the long run for society and for humanity? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think that these trade guilds, whatever we want to call them for the future, are really concerned with that. I think they're going to be concerned with them getting their piece of the pie. If you want to be a part of the solution, go start a business doing something that robots can't do right now, that can't be automated right now. Amen. That really, a lot of people are whining. It's like, why won't my business that I work for pay me more? Quit. Let somebody else take that job. Create your own job. Create competition. You can fight this wave of technology and the freelance gig economy, or you can surf the wave of the freelance gig economy, and you can start doing freelance podcast production or freelance graphic design. You can start selling your own stuff on Fiverr. You can start selling your own stuff on Elance or Upwork or any of these other places. You don't have to fight it. You can work with it. And for every person who leaves the
economy of working for a normal job, it creates all of the more demand for workers that are left, which forces them to get paid more, which forces you to get paid more. So not only are you helping yourself when you start your own business potentially, you're also helping everyone else left working in those cubicles, or even worse, the open plan office where nothing is private and nothing is sacred. But anyway, I'm sure we'll talk more about this. This is a trend that is ongoing. We do want to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment on YouTube, Facebook, and at libertybuzzard.com. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr.
I'm Dustin Hammett.
And you've been listening to Liberty Buzzard. This episode of Liberty Buzzard is brought to you by Tom Umstattd, CPA. Tom has over 35 years of experience helping people like you pay only their fair share in taxes. Don't let the IRS stress you out. Get Tom and his team on your team at taxmantom.com.